for my own company, I had been responsible for generating about 3,500 new clients over the years, and then with client companies in that industry, probably well over a million, and then now with financial advisors, working with them on all the same strategies. Some of the strategies are different. Some of them are more compliance constrained to one thing or another. But the process you need to get in front of the right prospect, to get their attention, to get them to raise their hand, to get in front of them is the same pretty much regardless of what you're doing.
I've got a really, really great guest for you today. Stephen Oliver has helped business owners ranging from law firms to international consulting organizations, martial arts schools to wealth managers with grassroots marketing, sales, internet marketing, and organization management systems. He's written 7 books on management and marketing and co-authored a book with marketing guru Dan Kennedy. Stephen, a very, very warm welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you here, and I'm so excited to delve deep into the mindset of financial advisors with the amazing angle that you bring, helping them to market. So the challenges that they run into, the rabbit holes they get stuck down in terms of their thinking. So I really, really want to dig deep into all of that with you. But before we do that, I'd love to know, you've had an amazing journey in terms of entrepreneurship. So could you just share the highlights of that so we can see how you've got to the place where you are today, and that's given you this skill set and this deep expertise to help people with their marketing?
Well, sure, and as you said, it was kind of a strange path. I went to Georgetown University thinking I was going to get an MBA at Harvard or Wharton and end up in Wall Street. And in fact, when I graduated Georgetown, interviewed with all the big Wall Street firms and was looking at the time, planning on the time, had thought for any number of years I was going to be in the financial services industry. But I had worked my way through college running a martial arts school and ended up moving to Denver. And I opened 5 schools in 18 months, 6 schools in 30 months, and ended up with about 2,500 active students or clients by the time I was 25 years old, and became very quickly such a high profile fixture in the Denver metropolitan area. We were doing infomercials, TV spots, the 2 major daily papers that existed at the time, Rocky Mountain News, Denver Post, constant publicity, and so forth, that over the years I just kept getting approached by managing partners of law firms, financial advisors, real estate brokers, and so forth, to help them and teach them what it was I was doing. And then, probably 15 or so years into that, I was at a point where I had a huge staff, and and by the way, they were spread in over Virginia, Colorado, and Florida. That I sought out a financial advisor specifically looking for deferred compensation for executives, and to create golden handcuffs for my people in one thing or another. And the guy I met was a top 0.1% guy with Northwestern Mutual. And he and I not only worked together, we became friends. And then I started looking under the covers of his business. And more or less 20 years ago now, I started working in the financial services business and working with financial advisors on their marketing, mostly behind the scenes until, I launched the book. I mailed you a copy too, but you haven't got one yet. But I launched the book last year, and really launched working directly with a broader range of financial advisors a couple of years ago. Right into COVID, and then went from there. But over the years, for my own company, I had been responsible for generating about 3,500 new clients over the years, and then with client companies in that industry, probably well over a million, and then now with financial advisors, working with them on all the same strategies. Some of the strategies are different. Some of them are more compliance constrained to one thing or another. But the process you need to get in front of the right prospect, to get their attention, to get them to raise their hand, to get in front of them is the same pretty much regardless of what you're doing.
Absolutely. What a great route you've done. And the experience and the expertise you picked up along the way. So you said something very, very startling, that you achieved huge success at a very young age.
Yeah.
So tell me about your mindset to be able to achieve that sort of success. Did you have no fear? Were you flying by the seat of your pants? Were you really enjoying it? Were you full of fear? What was going on inside your head while all of this was just blowing up around you?
Well, the old quote of standing on the shoulders of giants. When I worked my way through Georgetown, I was working for a multi-million-dollar organization in Washington D.C. The most successful in that niche, probably in the world at the time, certainly in North America at the time, and it opened my eyes to what was possible. And I remember I interviewed with all the big Wall Street firms in New York and one thing or another, and pretty quickly recognized, number one, I was making more money doing what I was already doing while a college student than they were offering, and number two is the opportunity to do it on my own as opposed to some big company was attractive. But a lot of it was just that is I was working within a multi-million-dollar operation, multi-location operation, and the owner of that company was internationally famous. He was the official martial arts instructor for Congress. He taught everybody from Bruce Lee and Muhammad Ali to Joe Biden, H.W. Bush, et cetera. So he was internationally known, and I had open access. I mean, he taught me everything that every question I asked, he answered and gave me access. So when I came to Colorado, in part it was because of that standing on shoulders of giants, and in part it was just the fearlessness of not understanding the downside. So I came out here to replicate what they had done in 25 years, and in 2 or 3 years, and of course that was fraught with peril. And it was going right into, as we all remember, the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, greatest real estate bust, round number one. That was in the United States when the S&L crisis, and the famous figures like Neil Bush had been bailed out by the government. So it was a fraught time, I must say as well.
Incredible. So you said that you were with very, very successful people. You were surrounded by them, which goes to show that principle works, that who you surround yourself with
Yeah.
is very, very important because it changes your mindset.
Yeah.
What did you learn from them about mindset that helped you with your success, with your rapid success? What did they teach you about, having a successful mindset?
Well, it's interesting, and it's almost like that book by Kiyosaki, I think his name is, The Rich Dad Poor Dad. You know, the organization I came from, I was from Oklahoma, had the exact opposite mindset. They viewed it as, this is a hobby, it's not something that you can make a living doing. And then I went out to the opposite spectrum and found the exact opposite. And if nothing else, I think it's the thing that I see financial advisors don't do, is it's take massive action, right? If you do what's the right way to say it? Impudent effort leads to impudent results. Massive action leads to massive results. That the thing I saw that they were doing is just constantly and never endingly promoting the business. So promoting public relations. So Junri got international press by taking Muhammad Ali to Korea. And another time, a congressman is assaulted on the street, and suddenly he's teaching other congressmen. And another time, an ambassador was assaulted. Of course, Washington D.C. at the time was the murder capital of the world, so it's or at least of North America. And another time, a ambassador was assaulted, and he ended up with almost all the kids from all the ambassadors in Ambassador Row, and ended up expanding into the former Soviet republics and so forth. But it was take massive action. But one of the things that he was good at, and the rest of the hierarchy was good at, is seeing opportunity when it existed and then jumping on it. And I see so many times people just aren't good at seeing opportunity. It's in part that mindset. If you don't think there's opportunity, you're not going to see it. If you think there's massive opportunity, you can see it and take advantage of it.
You've worked with a number of financial advisors.
Yes, absolutely.
What are you seeing as the biggest reasons in terms of mindset where they're not taking massive action? What stories are they telling themselves? How are they tripping themselves up?
Well, I think, and you had mentioned offline a couple of other niches, and accountants and bookkeepers and lawyers and so forth. And I think whether it's a lawyer, a financial accountant, or a martial arts school owner, it's so easy to get caught up in the technical apparatus of your business and doing the activity that your clients are paying you to do, that you miss the point that your first highest priority is always be going out to the market, marketing yourself, expanding your exposure, and finding more people, more new people coming in on the bus, right? And the advisors get lazy because this is an interesting study. I don't think I'm giving away any confidence. There's an internal study I was privy to, and they looked at clients of financial advisors, and the numbers aren't going to be quite right, but more or less 65 or 70% of clients of financial advisors were pretty unimpressed with their guy or gal, right? They, didn't have great affection for their skills and their follow up. And mostly it was about communication and perception of competency. And at least a third of them at any one time were thinking about leaving. Now, those numbers are interesting because every year over year, advisors have a very high retention rate of clients. But then what they think is, and it's indoctrinated by the industry, is that all their new clients are going to come through referral. Well, if I can't remember my advisor's name, if I'm not particularly impressed with them, I'm not exactly evangelizing them around all of my family, friends, relatives, coworkers, and so forth, right? So there's a huge gap in advisor perception of how they're interacting with clients as evidenced by their turnover rate compared with the reality of how unimpressed their clients are to begin with. And what I think advisors do, and all specialties do that. Lawyers think this, accountants think this, martial artists think this. They think that their technical expertise is going to lead to their client really likes them and really appreciates them. Well, for advisors, what they need to be doing is constantly communicating with clients, constantly reminding them that they exist, showing them what their resources and capabilities are, giving them pass along tools for their friends, giving them books, providing open webinars, open meetings. They need to be constantly communicating with their clients. And honestly, they need to do a lot more that's personality based, that's personal, that's interactive on a human level, and way less of sending them the technical document of, here's how your investments have fared year over year. So I see that as number one. Is advisors have a huge mismatch in how their clients perceive them versus how they think they're being perceived. And then they do very little to effectively communicate and stay in touch with, stay on top of, and to stay top of mind with their clients. I think number two is, and I tell every business owner I work with to do this, is really what you should do is instead of showing up at the office, finding out what requests have come in, reading your email, doing all of that stuff, I always tell them take a blank legal pad, go to Starbucks, and start the first 30 minutes of the day with what can I do today to promote my business? What calls do I need to make? What activities do I need to do? Is there some social media things I need to do? Whatever it might be, but what can I do today to market my business? And if you don't do that, you can get to 4, 5, 6 o'clock at the end of the day, and you realize, one, you haven't done anything, and two is you haven't even thought about it, right? You've just been reacting to appointments, reacting to inbound calls, reacting to emails, reacting to text. I think that's the most important thing. If there's one simple thing, take a blank legal pad, turn off all the devices, and just start every day with what can I do today? What can I do this week? What can I do this month to more aggressively promote my business?
This is great, great stuff. Why do you think there is so much resistance to communicating with existing clients, ex clients, marketing for new clients? What is it that is in their way? Because if you look at it, it seems fairly simple. You show up as a human to your clients, you build a relationship with them, you're more likely to get referrals. So what is it? I mean, when it comes down to common sense, we say, well, it's logical that if you were to take these actions consistently, you would get a better result.
Mhm.
But emotionally, they're not doing it. What
Yeah.
is it, do you think, that's stopping them?
Well, one of the the great coaches I've worked with over the years, Dan Kennedy, and his terminology is marketing incest. Is in any field, everybody looks around at what everybody else is doing and just does what they do. And in the worse than any field I've ever seen, and I think it is possible to argue that attorneys or CPAs are maybe just as bad, but worse than any I've ever seen is number one in the U.S. anyway. There's one example that most people could come up with, which is Fisher Investments, that does very good direct response marketing all over the place. Everything from I'll have the TV on all day and I'll probably see 5 of their ads. I subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. I'll see their ads 2 or 3 times a week. Anytime you go on LinkedIn or any other social media, you'll see their ads. But other than that, when they look around at what everybody else is doing, mostly nobody is doing anything. Is they're relying on referrals. When they meet with somebody, they have some old canned line about the way I get compensated is, you send me your friends, or they just kind of have an antiquated way of approaching their current clients for referrals. But when they look around their industry, they see very little examples. If you look at financial advisors, you'll see examples of baiting people into the room with a filet mignon and then trying to pitch them on retirement planning and then convert them, which, it works. Getting people in the room who are the right target audience and so forth is great. But the flip is I came to get a free steak dinner and now you're trying to convert me to services rather than me just trying to be there, excited to hear about your subject to begin with without the misdirect. Um, or referrals. They look around and they see just such a limiting view of things. On the why they don't communicate with their clients, I think it goes deeper. I think they've been so cowed by compliance that they end up thinking that much of what really would be effective is going to be a problem with compliance, although nothing that I ever tell them to do has anything to do with making representations about earnings, breaking any, laws in the UK, US, anywhere else. All of it is about personal stories. And, I went on a fishing trip and this happened. And it's all about that kind of stuff, right? It's about creating connection. It's about personal connection. Our mutual friend, Dave D, his formula is, it's interesting, it's stories, and it's a connection, but very little of it is technical about the business. Very little of it is really anything that compliance would even want to, care about, much less be concerned about. But they get frozen into inactivity, thinking that everything has to be run through, 5 English teachers, 4 attorneys, and 3 compliance experts, rather than just make it personal. Obviously, we don't want them to get in trouble, run it through whoever, but there's nothing to object to.
And there's a massive opportunity that's being missed here.
Huge, huge, massive opportunity.
What do you think is the secret sauce that the more successful financial advisors have? What is it in terms of their mindset that they have in place that's enabling them to take advantage of these opportunities, build rapport, show their personality, go to a wider market and get more clients?
Well, for advisors that are part of a bigger company, is so much of it in a bigger company depends upon who you're hanging out with and who you're listening to, right? So if you end up with the 90% that are going to fail and you're listening to what they're saying, you're going to end up as one of them. And again, this is an industry where, I would say the average company bringing in a new financial advisor fresh, and some of them are very good at recruiting out of college and so forth, they have a 90, 95%. I was talking to somebody else in the industry on my podcast just recently, and he said 100%. I said 95%. So, let's take it in that range. Most of them, they never learn how to take massive action on marketing themselves. And so they end up with like the MLM industry. Who's your warm list? Let's go sell Aunt Martha and let's go get Aunt Martha's friends, rather than being proactive, figuring out who they want to target, figuring out how to get in front of those people in mass. My guys will end up at the convention of the doctors or the convention of the whoever it might be, but they'll go find 50 or 500 or 1,000 of them in mass, rather than onesie twosies random, whoever they end up getting, and then expanding from there in a haphazard way.
COVID changed so much, didn't it? It was a real opportunity to pivot from doing seminars and face-to-face selling to going online. And
Yeah.
I know some financial advisors jumped at the opportunity and they did extremely well during COVID. They were doing webinars and finding all sorts of ways to market online.
Yeah.
And their reach just was so much bigger than it ever been before. And they were very pleasantly surprised. So there is really a mindset issue, isn't it? It's whether I can transition into a new way of doing things
Mm.
without losing my business, or whether that's just too scary to try something new, which is unproven. And therefore, I've got to stay in the old way of doing things and hoping that business will pick up and we could just go back to the old way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a couple of elements for why some of them didn't adapt that way. Obviously, in the U.S. anyway, the vast majority of successful advisors, and I'm not talking about the in absolute count, but the vast majority of all of the assets under management are 50 to 60-year-olds who have been in the industry a considerable period of time, and they're the same people, by the way, who are fleeing all the big companies and going independent and in mass for a number of reasons. But within those groups, oftentimes they have this image of all my clients have to be within 5 mile radius, 10 mile radius. They all have to be in my town. I only can meet with them face to face in order for them to feel comfortable. And they had a hard time adapting to, number one, in the U.S., most of them can sell anywhere in the United States with fill out a few forms, or anywhere in North America. And so they miss the point that they can expand their geographic reach dramatically. And a lot of the advisors who are in the 500 million to 2 billion assets under management range, they're not trying to find people in their neighborhood. They're trying to find people in a focused target audience and be the specialized expert for those people. And that implies going to a broader geography and a narrower focus, right? So a lot of them were hesitant to do that. They think that, well, people will drive down to that steakhouse, but will they come online? And then the problem with marketing online is it's much easier to niche focus and broaden geography. So they miss that point altogether.
Which is such a shame because they're leaving money on the table and someone else is going to come along and snap up those clients.
Yeah. Well, I can give you a good example of that, leaving money on the table, is when I think when people who are very sharp at running webinars promote a webinar, promote a event online, what they know is that the value is in the registration, not so much in the person showing up for the webinar, right? As we all know, doing a lot of webinars, once somebody registers, I know they've raised their hand. And whether they show up or not, I'm not going to wait. And what I see advisors do, whether it's a live steak dinner, a live in-person meeting, or a webinar, they discard everybody who registers and doesn't show up. And then when people show up, they ask them to raise their hand and schedule an appointment with if they want to. And then most of the times they even discard the ones that don't make an appointment and just focus on the low-hanging fruit of the people who make an appointment right away. Well, I'm sure you would, I would. I'm most interested in, I got them to raise their hand, they filled out the form and registered. Now we're going to get them the information, we're going to follow up, we're going to qualify them, we're going to move them to appointment if they're ready. Same thing with a live event, right? If the guy has or gal has a blowout on the way to the meeting, or just happen to be in a foul mood that day for some reason, I'm not going to discard them. I'm going to make sure that I'm following up, moving them through my process. But even there, on a webinar, it might be 70% of the people who register are good prospects that we ignore. Might be more. With a live meeting, it might be 10 or 20% of them, because the show rate tends to be higher. But still, it's people that we could get to earlier and have much more success with.
That's a great top tip.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you. I'd love to know, when you have a setback, how do you get past it? How do you bounce out of it? Because we things don't always go to plan. We know that, and life is full of curveballs, which makes it so interesting. So what's your strategy for getting past those times?
Yeah. In my first book, it's called Everything I Wish I Knew When I Was 22. We just
Well, great
uh
title.
yeah, thank you. And we just updated it recently. But one of the things I talk about is being, I did the multi-million-dollar company by the time I was 25, and the rest of the story is about the time I was 29, I was chapter 7, chapter 11, and divorced in the middle of the financial crisis going on. And I tell the story about making the comeback from that. And so my business, and in today's terms, it was doing let's say 3.8 million at that time, and then dropped in 1 year by about 30%. And part of it with me was, I had just sold the dream house in the middle of the divorce and all the stuff, and you can imagine all the emotions that go with it. And I sat down and did some goal setting. And one, my goal was to be back to in those dollars be back up about 30%, which seemed like a Herculean effort at the time. And so I went through, and I wasn't going to have the house back. I wasn't going to have, the dream car or whatever, but I went down and put a Rolex Presidential in layaway at the local jewelry store. And the point was I could get the watch out if we hit our target goal by the end of the year. And so the target that I had for the year we hit by November 1st. So I went and got the watch. I'm not wearing it today. It was a gold presidential, which today's terms about $35,000 watch. And it's not the fact that it's a stupid, ridiculous way to spend money, a stupid, ridiculous bauble, something that makes no, logical sense whatsoever. But it was just something that could kind of prove to me that I was back. And then over the years, anytime I was kind of feeling broke, I would wear that watch. And it was a reminder. I could look down and say, oh, well, I came back from the rubble, once before. I can do it again. It's kind of a silly story, but it was a useful tool to drive that activity, right? And I think a lot of times when you hit a stumbling point, what happens is the future suddenly looks bleak. We could use the old NLP terminology for how your mind works, but I think the reality is you don't see a bright future, you see a dim future. And oftentimes what happens is you end up in just trying to survive, trying to make incremental growth, rather than setting wild, crazy, exciting goals. I stole from Tony Robbins. He said people don't experience burnout; they just have impotent goals. And I think that's a good way to think about it. And in fact, I wrote down a great quote here the other day. I was listening to a live stream with Elon Musk, and he said, "You either grow or you collapse. There is no status." I thought that was a good one.
That's very good. Yes.
I've always said there
Yeah.
is no plateau, right?
Yeah.
You're either on a slow and steady decline. There'll soon be a rapid decline, or you're growing.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And because we're always moving one direction or another. I think that's
Mhm.
absolutely brilliant. So what you did, you anchored your good feeling, your motivation,
Yeah,
your goal to that watch. And
yeah,
every
yeah,
time you looked at the watch, it just brought you back into that good
exactly,
place again. Yeah, that's a
exactly.
really great way of doing it. And what's if you were to look back at your life so far, what would you say is the biggest lesson that life has taught you?
Oh, that's interesting. It's hard to come up with something pithy, I guess. I go back to my martial arts roots, and I've kind of thought of my business like I've been in business 40 years now, so I kind of think it like it's a 40 round fight, right? I had a couple of rounds where I got knocked down, a couple of rounds where I lost, and a whole bunch of rounds that I won, oftentimes with knockouts or knockdowns. And in any particular month, year, you're going to have good times, you're going to have bad times, but it's the overall arch of the process that really is what's important, right? And so I think that was, to me, a good metaphor for, well, okay, that wasn't a good round, but next round will be better. Um, the overall, on financial goals, and oftentimes when you're younger, you're striving for the house, the car, the one thing or another. The thing about all those goals is they're really wonderful goals to set as aspiration. And then once you've got them, they don't have much power anymore, right? So the thing to always keep in mind, if you don't have something further out there, whether it's accumulation or whether it's acquisition or whatever it might be, if there's not something that's always out there driving you, the worst thing to do is to attain whatever it was you were shooting for without having several things on beyond. In the martial arts side, what we were finding is, kids would get their first degree black belt and then drop out, just kind of like people graduating from high school and stopping to learn. And what we figured out very rapidly is the worst thing to do is for them to have what seemed like a high goal and get it. So we always have to have the goal of second, third degree, fourth degree, be the local champion, the national champion, and to keep setting those higher, further out objectives, so that you don't end up with that disappointment. I read a study that, in fact, there was a great quote. This is a different story, but it was a Nobel Prize winner, and somebody asked him, well, for God's sake, what do you do when you win the Nobel Prize in your field? And he said, well, change fields, of course. And but the study I read was of the Apollo astronauts, and once they came back from the moon, many of them went into depression. Well, what's next, right? I just went to the moon. What's my next goal?
What do you aim for after that?
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most important things in business anyway, is to keep aiming for and shooting for a higher level goal.
Yeah, dream big. We don't dream big enough because we're scared to. We think, we've grown up with the old conditioned thinking of, well, you can only have so much in life. Life is stacked against you. Don't expect too much. You'll only be disappointed. We grew up hearing those messages. And then we think, well, that's the truth. I don't want disappointment. I want to just make sure I rein it in. And then I could be quite satisfied with life. But it leads to a life of mediocrity and disappointment.
Yeah.
And, when we look back, we think, well, maybe I could have gone for it. What's the worst thing that could have happened? So that's a really great message to end on. And thank you so much. It's been fascinating talking to you and hearing all about, your experiences and the value that you've been able to share. How can our listeners find out more about you and the fantastic work you're doing?
AdvisorWealthMastery.com is our website. And we'd love to gift them a free copy of my latest book. We're getting ready to do a new little series, but this is the latest one that's been published. Extraordinary Marketing for Financial Advisors. They can go to my site, get it for free. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everywhere else, but probably the website would be the easiest.
Fantastic. I'd encourage everyone who's listening and watching to go along and grab a copy of that free book, because it's fantastic reading and you're going to learn so much from it. Thank you so much for being with us. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nina. It was a joy.
Bye-bye for now.